Okay, welcome to episode 5 of Building Process. This is an important milestone for the show. One of the things I want to do before putting any shoulder into promotion and starting to develop more of the marketing strategy around the show is just make it to 5 episodes, because there's a lot of material out there on podcasting, webinars, creating media. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to do it on a regular basis. You got to be able to wake up in the morning and not dread that part of your day where you have to record. And I wasn't quite sure if I would have the juice continually. It's easier to do this if you have someone else keeping you accountable, for instance, if you have guest or a co-host. But I've been able to keep up the cadence, and I think a lot of it is because I see the benefits even to myself to structuring these processes and thinking through it in this way. And I'm able to take the lessons that I'm communicating here and put them in similar formats for my own company, as well as take these lessons and give them out to other people. And the show will continue to develop as I get more feedback, as I'm able to go into new modes of discussion. I would like to have guests eventually, so that's something that will be coming around the corner. We're also going to have episodes where instead of talking about a particular process, we just talk about a framework or a way of thinking through different kinds of problems and different kinds of systems. So we're going to have a little more variety coming up, and I'm excited to see what happens as we start to push this thing out into the world and see who else is interested in learning about this journey and building operations and building process here. So one of the ones I want to talk about today is something that I've done a lot of work on, and a lot of the early episodes will probably be in this frame, and it's in the area of collections. One of the reasons I'm focused on this is it's a critical piece of business, and yet there's so little literature written on this. I really struggled to find best practices and a lot of new information about collections, which is what led me to build a lot of my own systems around it, and then also to start to share some of this thought leadership, because I presume it's useful to almost every single business that has to go through some kind of customer collections process. And certainly when you're on the smaller end, you may wear multiple hats. If you're in an operational role, you may be involved in collections. However, wherever you put this in your business stack, whether you have frontline people, account managers doing collections, or if you have your finance team doing it exclusively, you're going to want some way for thinking through the process. So what do we mean when we talk about collections prioritization framework? If you have one customer who pays you one invoice a year, then this is not going to be useful for you, because that's going to be the main thing you have to collect all year. But a lot of businesses serve a large number of customers, and they serve them with varying degrees of services. Invoice sizes also vary, and there'll also be timeline elements that vary. So the due dates, when the invoice is created, what kind of process those customers have in order to pay an invoice. So there's a big difference between a small business, for instance, that mostly has the owner execute payments versus a much larger entity that has to go through some kind of PO process, or maybe has to annually re-sign a contract or something along those lines. So we're not going to talk about every single aspect of that today, although those are other topics we will bring up. What we're going to talk about today is you've got a list of collections you need to go out and do on any given day. How do you prioritize that list? So a lot of people would say, start with the biggest amounts and then move down from there. And that is generally the principle we're going to put forward here, but there's a little bit more nuance to it, and a lot of it has to do with your follow-up cycle. And what I encourage people to think about is not just what's my absolute list, but in reality, what can I do on any given day? So I'll give you an example. If you have, say, 150 invoices due, if you want to call every one of those customers, my hunch is it's going to be very hard to call all of those customers in a single day. So you're going to want to have some kind of cadence that you or your team can actually keep up, and then go through that on a day-to-day basis, so you can just chip away from the top of that priority list. And then you'll get some lucky breaks too. Some stuff will come in and you won't have to deal with it. So ideally, this is a process that you can refresh every morning, so you know, here's the biggest priorities for today. Here are the invoices I have to follow up on. So as we always do in building process, we're going to start with some of the questions we should ask about collections. So we'll go over to ChatGPT and put in a prompt to give us some ideas, 5 questions that we want to ask about collections prioritization and how that might factor in. All right, so we're over here at ChatGPT, and here is the prompt in order to generate our questions for the day. So I am recording a building process episode on prioritizing customer collections. An example scenario is a business with 150 invoices due. Some are overdue. Let me update that. Some are overdue. Some are due soon. Others are due much later. Amounts vary, payment types vary, and customer size and process varies amongst the list. In order to determine the 10 to 15 invoices I should reach out to today, missed that typo there, what are the 5 questions I should ask? And the reason I said 10 to 15 invoices here is this is the let's just say for the sake of my team or myself, depending on what kind of role I'm in, this is the amount I've decided I want to make sure I do that amount of outreach every single day. So even though there's 150 due, in theory, I should be able to get through the whole list in a 10-day period. And what I want to know is, am I working on the most critical 10 at this time? And one of the things about the outreach is we're not going to do it back to back to back to back. So you'll have gaps in there where you can actually work down the next parts of the priority list, and then slowly things get paid down, so they will also get moved off the list. So let's see what ChatGPT says about our questions here. All right, we have our questions, and as usual, the things we have maybe touched on, but this brings a little bit finer point to it. So first one is, which invoices are already overdue and by how long? So overdue invoices are typically your highest priority touch points because the payment window has already closed. And yes, this is a great strategy. So you want to think about the overdue invoices typically as the ones that you can call on with an increasing degree of urgency. An example would be, if you have an invoice that's due today, it's probably a little extreme to call that customer first thing in the morning. You want to see what it looks like. They'll probably schedule it throughout the day, right? Versus an overdue invoice where you could say, look, you missed a deadline. It's time for you to get moving on this. So there is a sense of urgency that you can give them if an invoice is already overdue. All right. Next question. What is the dollar value and relative impact of each invoice? Yeah, this should be pretty straightforward. This is mainly how we're going to sort, right? So your business has invoices that go from $10 to $1,000. That $1,000 invoice is going to have a bigger effect on your cash flow. That's going to be something that you want to spend your time on first. Okay, third question. What is the payment history and reliability of each customer? Yes, this is really critical. I don't know if we're going to talk about all of this today, but there is an aspect of, how reliable a customer is. We use a categorization framework, and then we are able to determine how aggressive we need to be in the outreach given that. So if they're very unreliable, then we're quite aggressive in our outreach, versus a much more reliable customer may have just missed a deadline or may pay on the due date. Then we don't do all that much outreach except for making sure that they have a copy of the invoice and a quick reminder just before they pay it. So that can really vary greatly in how you approach the customers. Number 4, what are the customer's internal processes and payment methods? So they give an example here. Some customers require long approval chains or specific invoice formats, which can delay payments if you don't intervene. Others may have automated ACH setups where a reminder could quickly unlock funds. Yeah, the classic example here is customers that require a PO, right? So if you contact them on the due date, they're going to then have to delay for whatever time it takes to get the PO in and out of procurement. So those customers, you want to have some kind of early outreach process. We're not really going to talk about that here because that's a different framework, right? It's not exactly about how we prioritize collections, which are already in flight, already ready to go. But you want to think about sending those invoices out earlier. You want to think about notifying those customers earlier. You want to think about reminding those customers that, hey, if you want to hit this due date, you got to get that PO to us, X amount of days before it. All right, and then the last question is, what is the strategic importance of the customer relationship? Yes, so super important. Consider whether this is a high-value long-term customer where collections should be handled diplomatically. Now, one thing I will say about that, though, is, a relationship goes two ways, and customers who are willing to continually blow off the due dates and the payment rules and be kind of careless about that, they may not actually be taking the relationship as well as you. And a lot of times what happens here is you have customers that are really, really big dollar amounts, and so you think it's a super important relationship. What it is super material impact, but the relationship still could be weak. So this is an area where you definitely want to use some consideration, but I think also your collections process can inform how good is my relationship exactly. If I had a great relationship with this customer, would they be treating all of our deadlines and our due dates like this? And obviously the due dates are in for a reason, so I'm still a believer that the due date's the due date. You shouldn't expect your customers to pay before that. To the extent that they do, maybe you can offer them some kind of trade discount for it, or you can at least say thanks for doing that. And there are certain kinds of customers or certain cultures, internationally in particular, where people just pay right away, and that's obviously super welcome. But expect to get paid on the due date and no sooner. And then anything that's overdue, that's another expectation that you can build into your reporting. But you shouldn't expect payment prior to a due date. It just doesn't make sense. I pay all my vendors on the due date, and that helps us with our cash management cycle. So I think this is a great set of questions. The ones that will primarily impact the prioritization is really this question of the dollar value and the overdue invoices, but these will also go into other frameworks that we'll be exposing in future weeks. So what we're going to do is take these questions, throw them right into the document that we're setting up, and then we'll build out the flowchart, the decision tree for how we are determining each customer's prioritization level. And so this, you want to think of this decision tree as the way the list prioritizes internally. And then how you do that is via some automation. Maybe you have a virtual assistant work on it. I'm never one to tell you what tool to use. I'm just here to show you how to build a process to make these decisions and have either the people or the automations around you do that process for you. So let's move over to Lucidchart for that. All right, so here is our flow on a per invoice basis. So we want to think, here's our customer invoice. It comes into the queue and we're asking these questions. Is it overdue or is it due? If it's not, we're just going to cycle that out to the next. Now, we may have pre-reminders or some other kind of automated system, but you definitely don't want to be calling on invoices that are not due. So you just cycle out and to the next. And then if it's one of the top 15 amounts due, that's the number we had, so that 10 to 15 rule there, then we're going to go and we're going to see if we've emailed them in the last X number of days. Now, you should have some kind of predefined cycle with your team. For instance, 3 days would be good, right? So that you're not emailing them all the time, especially for a recently due invoice. You can also pick up the speed with this too. So after a couple weeks, if they're non-responsive, you can pick up the speed. Same with calling. So I use this to represent the multiple outreaches that you might have to do right here. So, if they've received an email and you're still waiting on a response to that, then you will cycle on to the next. If they haven't been in the last days, in other words, if the email's now past that period, you're going to call. So you're going to escalate to a phone call. And then you're going to continue that outreach. And then eventually what you want to get to is some kind of positive response. Hey, what's going on? Some kind of explanation for it. A lot of times they have excuses that may be real, maybe not, but they have to at least be plausible excuses. Oh, I'm sorry, our accounts payable person was out of town this week. Insert here whatever that is. Businesses with really good systems and processes, they don't really fall into this trap, but a lot of customers do not, and so you have to help them through that. But assuming you can get to a positive response, then you get to your resolution, which is some kind of payment, some kind of plan. Every now and then they need your help with something, but even then, communication is still a good strategy for them. It's always shocked me when customers decide not to communicate at that moment. But if they're still not responding, if you've now done your given amount of outreach, then there's eventually some kind of consequence here. Now, this is also very hard to do with collections, but the main things that I recommend doing is have some way to turn off service if it's an ongoing service. That's exactly what the utility company would do to you if you had not paid your bill for a long enough time period. And do make sure that time period is consistent. So if it's 60 days of no resolution, then make it 60 days for everybody. Don't just pick and choose based on random feelings about customers, so that you can publish and show a consistent policy. The other consequence you can have is if the work's already done and they're not paying for it, then you can send them to a collections agency. Now, this is not something to do lightly because it most likely will end the customer relationship, and it's also something that's going to cost you a little bit. But if they're really not responsive, then you should have some kind of process for that to happen. And then the collections agency will deal with more of the hard scrabble tactics to go get that invoice amount from them. So that's the process. That's the flow. What we're thinking about right now is we're looking at overdue and due invoices. We're looking at the heavily overdue as more so on the top, and then we want to look at the top 15 amounts, right? And then we want to look at where they are in the cycle. So have they been emailed in my case, it's a 3-day cycle. Have they been emailed in the last 3 days? Okay, if so, we're not going to reach out to them today. Have they been called in the last 3 days? Okay, if so, we're not going to call them today, right? But every time you hit that 4th day in the cycle, assuming it meets all the other criteria and it's in the top 15 of the amounts, then that should show up. And the way this works in our firm is we get a morning email every morning to say, hey, here's the priority collections for the day. Like if you just send this straight to your finance assistant, they'll know this is the most important invoice for you to call today based on where we are in the call cycle for everybody else. So that's the way you want to think about that. Is it's not a process you're going to get done in one day. It's a process your team is going to do every single day and constantly have to relive that and reprioritize those invoices. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to throw the chart into the document, and then we're going to do as we've been doing, which I think is a really cool step here, is we're going to take the transcript of the audio we've recorded so far, and we're going to plug that into ChatGPT and see if it can come up with our procedure. So I'll have the next part of the recording show me in ChatGPT with the flowchart and the transcript of the recording and see what it comes up with as our actual procedure here for this collections prioritization framework. All right, so here we are in ChatGPT, and we have the transcript from the first part of the show as well as the flowchart. And the prompt is, I'm going to upload the transcript from the episode so far. In addition, I've uploaded the prioritization flowchart. Use these two assets, craft a procedure for implementing this collections prioritization framework. So let's see what it comes up with for our procedure here. So I just gave this a read, and this is a really great starting procedure. You could actually give this to an accounting or finance assistant and probably get them to do exactly what you needed every morning. So even if you didn't automate some process like this, which is the direction you'll want to go with it, you certainly could get up and rolling with it. So what the steps are here is really to gather our invoice data, right? First, just make sure we've got all of our invoices coming out of the accounting system correctly. You want to flag the overdue invoices, and you want to also have the due ones. And then in terms of the prioritization filter, we're looking at the top 15 highest value amounts due, and then the outreach decision paths, right? So decide if they've been spoken to recently enough that you can avoid them for now, and if not, then they should go right at the top of the list. And then we've got the outreach actions. I think this might have actually gotten the order wrong because it says to call first. Usually I would focus on an email first, but it also depends on how far overdue the invoice is. And then so we've got some of the resolutions and consequences here. This is going to vary greatly per business. So, just have some notion of, obviously the resolution is you get paid, have a notion of what the consequence can realistically be in your business. It's going to vary a lot depending on what you do and what kind of products and services you have. And then it just has you run the process over and over again. So this is a really good starting point. There's some tweaks I would make, small tweaks within the list, but this gives you an idea of, just talking through that process, building out the flowchart, exactly what we can do to build out this collections prioritization process and hand this off to, a less skilled team and have them pretty much get to the right outcomes, assuming that they have an accounting system that they can reference here. So this is great, especially for an area that, as I talked about earlier, there's just not a ton of thought leadership on it. So it's something to think about. Maybe one of the reasons people think that there's not enough thought leadership on this is it should be obvious. All this stuff is easy to figure out. But there still are these lingering questions of how often do I contact? When do I do outreach? And so just defining that for your team will allow you to have firm ground to stand on so that you can test and iterate as you go and develop your process more for the future. So thank you so much for joining me for episode 5 of Building Process. If you want to learn more about the show, it's buildingprocess.substack.com and Building Process on YouTube. For Twitter, I have a higher personal following, so I'm going to start pushing the show there. Even though we do have the Twitter handle, I'm going to be focused on doing self-promotion for the show. So that's going to be something that I release more in the upcoming days, and then maybe move it over to LinkedIn as we get some interest there. But I really appreciate you getting this far with me, and I'm looking forward to some of the episodes that we'll get to do in the future where we talk about just some of the larger ideas and frameworks as opposed to building a particular process, and also doing some shows where we have guests in the mix. I will make sure that this procedure gets into the show document that is linked at the Substack and also at the YouTube. And I hope you have a great time until next week. Thanks.